Hello, everyone, and welcome to Whiskey Uncorked. My name is Brian, and we are back once again with another Scotch whiskey review. This time, we're talking about a bottle that has gotten a ton of attention over the last couple of years. We're back in the cask forward category. We're back on Islay. Today, we're talking about the Kilchoman Sanaig. I think of all the bottles that maybe I've gotten requests to do, the Kilchoman Sanaig is probably top on that list. And it's for fairly good reason. That's not surprising, as this thing has blown up over the last couple of years in terms of popularity with the online Scotch whiskey community. And it's also a bottle that, frankly, I have ignored up to this point. But Kilchoman has been gaining a lot of attention over the last couple of years. Somewhat surprisingly so, only because they've been doing what they've been doing now. I think they first started releasing whiskey back in 2009. I'll get into that in just a second. But yeah, they've been releasing pretty solid whiskey for quite a while. But it's only really been recently that it's really taken off in terms of its popularity, uh, just kind of across the entire spectrum. I'm sure many of you have been onto Kilchoman now for quite a long time. But for whatever reason, it took a few maybe bigger online personalities to start bringing some attention to the Sanaig in particular, but really Kilchoman as a whole. So a bit of a confession, this is my first bottle of Kilchoman Sanaig, and actually it's my first official bottling of Kilchoman at all that I've bought in a really long time. In fact, going back to 2010. Back in those days, I was traveling for work, and there was a summer there. I think it was the summer of 2010, where I was basically in the UK for 2 weeks at a time, 6 or 7 times over the course of the summer. And one of those weekends, I drove up to Glasgow to meet a coworker. We spent a weekend in Glasgow. Definitely was not a whiskey drinker at that point. But when we started asking around, talking to bartenders about what whiskey we should drink, this was always one that came up, and it was actually pretty difficult to track one down. They were sold out most places, but what now that I think about it, probably my first whiskey hunt back in 2010 in Glasgow was for the Kilchoman. I think it was the Mackay Bay at that point. Um, Ended up finding one, bringing it home. Had no idea what to do with it, but I think my brother even might still have the empty bottle in his whiskey cave. But so yeah, that was my first experience with Kilchoman. I have a single barrel that I picked up not too long ago, and it is absolutely fantastic. And now that I think about it, I do have an older bottle of the Islay barley, or the 100% Islay, tucked away. But this is really my first official bottling uh, engagement that I've had with the distillery. And there is a reason, and it's a reason I've talked about on this channel before, where probably a good chunk of my whiskey journey, my Scotch whiskey journey in particular, heavily peated Islas, particularly 10 years or younger. I've enjoyed them. In fact, I can outright love them, but similar to kind of what I've said in maybe recent weeks, sometimes there's these styles of whiskey that I like, but don't necessarily stick in my brain. And they tend to be something that I kind of pick and choose to drink on specific occasions rather than just something I'm going back to over and over again. This kind of ended up with me having a pretty good selection of heavily peated Islay whiskeys on my shelf, and I just didn't buy Kilchoman because I figured I had enough already on my shelf, and was it really going to be that much different anyways? Well, in recent times, that has begun to change. I have been drinking much more peated whiskey. In fact, there was a pretty good stretch here on this channel where I kind of looked at what I had been reviewing, and it was almost all peated whiskey. But I just naturally tended to lean towards more the Campbelltown style of peat, Speyside, Highlands, that sort of thing. And just the really kind of heavy peat forward, medicinal, industrial, whatever it may have been, was something that, what can I say? I needed to be in the mood to drink it. But that's been changing quite a bit lately, and I've been enjoying myself quite immensely. Just goes to show the more you drink something, whether it's a specific style of scotch or it's another kind of whiskey, the more you start to understand it, the more it's less of a shock to your system, so to speak. The more you drink something, the more you focus on it, the more you think about it, the more it starts to make sense, and the more you can start to enjoy the nuances in something that maybe you didn't think there was a lot of nuance to in the first place. But enough about me and my shortcomings as a whiskey drinker. Let's talk a little bit about Kilchoman and in particular the Sanaig. Now, Kilchoman was opened in 2005 on Islay, one of the first whiskeys on Islay in a long time. We all know that there have been a few others creeping up and a few others that have even released whiskey like Ardnahoe this past year. And but Kilchoman was kind of the first, and they got in way before the whole whiskey boom, the whole wave of new distilleries opening up all over the world. So they're a little bit of a trailblazer in that regard, coming into a well-celebrated, even at that time. Obviously, Islay has been famous for making whiskey basically since the beginning of whiskey. And for them to come in as a newcomer at that time, when that was basically unheard of, coming out of the whiskey lock, coming out of this depression in the whiskey market globally, building a distillery on Islay and living up to everything that Islay represents, and just basically knocking the whole new distillery thing out of the park and creating a blueprint that I have to imagine a lot of other people have been following over the course of the last few years. So Kilchoman is a family-owned farm distillery. They try to provide as much of their barley needs via the farm surrounding the distillery. They haven't quite been able to keep up with the demand and the production needs. I know they are continuing to expand, particularly to make up for the loss of the malt that they were getting from the Port Ellen maltings, that is now going to supply Diageo's own distilleries. All right, so on to the Sanaig in particular. This is a non-age stated bottle, which isn't all that shocking, and obviously this is going to be a peat forward whiskey. There's no doubt about that this is a very peat heavy industrial whiskey with a lot of asphalt and tar and hot oil, oily rags, however you tend to look at it. But the Sanaig is part of their official bottling line. This is consistently available, and the thing that sets this apart from what tends to be their standard release, the Macure Bay, that tends to be 100%, I think, bourbon. This is 70% sherry and 30% bourbon. And of course, this is coming in at 46% natural color, and it is non-chill filtered. Price-wise, it looks like in the UK from Kilchoman's website, I think this was listed around £52. Here in the States, it tends to range in the kind of that $70 to $80 mark. I just saw this at Total Wine today, this morning, and it happened to be on the shelf there for $76, obviously plus tax. So it's falling right in line in terms of pricing with a lot of the other whiskeys in its own category. All right, with that, why don't we get into the nosing and tasting notes and give this thing a score. First up on the nose, here we go. So the first thing you're going to be hit with is obviously the peat. I believe this is peated to 50 ppm at the barley level, which is pretty high up there, given kind of where some of the other distilleries, typically I think they're like 44 up to maybe 55. I think Ardbeg might be 55. But it is peated, and that definitely comes through on the nose. As I mentioned, Kilchoman is definitely what I consider to be an industrial smoke, an industrial whiskey overall. And typically that can range from descriptions of rubber tires, hot oil, hot asphalt in the summer, like freshly laid asphalt, just very sulfuric, dainty, I guess. I mean, just heavy and makes you think of like burning rubber, that sort of thing. And I think that is a style of peat that I have grown to like more and more over the years. I remember getting some bottles early on that had that quality, and it was a little overwhelming, but I've warmed up to that style quite a bit. All right, other than the peat smoke, probably going to be looking at the fruit. The sherry influence here is unequivocal. I'm getting mostly plums and like dark cherries, Bing cherries, that sort of thing. There's a savoriness, a kind of a charred meat quality to it as well. And then a nice little dose of caramel and maybe even some strawberries to kind of brighten it up a little bit. But overall, there's not much to complain about here. It's a pretty big, bold, heavy, dark, all around Islay whiskey. There's some nuance to it, but generally speaking, it's kind of announcing right up front what it is. And if this is your style of whiskey, I don't think anyone's going to be complaining. All right, let's see how it's tasting. Cheers. All right, so this is one of those whiskeys that is just hyper complex in terms of the sensory experience. It's mouth-watering. You get sweet, sour. It's peppery and spicy. There's some dryness there. It's viscous overall. Definitely kind of hangs around, just coating your mouth. I think that first sip is always just trying to keep track of all of the different like sensations and just the types of flavors before you even start thinking about what you're actually tasting. So with that, I'm going to go in for a second sip right away and actually pay attention to the flavors themselves. But it's a pretty fun ride overall, and just the amount of things that are going on in there at the same time. But here we go. Cheers. So I do think there's more sweetness on the palate overall than would be that was indicated by the nose. There's a lot more vanilla. The caramel comes through quite a bit more. It kind of darkens up on the finish where it starts turning into more of a toffee, but you're kind of getting a lot of other things that you'd expect. Fruit-wise, definitely, again, darker fruits, plums, dark cherries, maybe even a touch of like cranberry or something like that, something a little bit drier. And then, of course, given the sherry influence and the peat, you're almost always going to get like a dark chocolate with that combination. The peat itself doesn't taste like hot oil or asphalt. It's coming across a little bit peppery. There's some baking spices in there as well, raisins. But the peat integrates on the palate actually really nicely. I think given the nose, there was maybe a risk of it just kind of being an ashy kind of smoke bomb, but it ends up really integrating nicely and providing a bit of richness, and where you can really kind of tell the peat's character is kind of in the pepperiness of it. And it just ends up being, again, a really, really full, rich experience overall. And it's surprisingly well balanced, given, especially on the nose, just the heavy brashness of the experience. All right, I'm gonna take the liberty to do one more and see if I grab anything else, particularly on the finish. So I can get some of that savory quality I was talking about on the nose. That is there as well. There's some umami, a bit of like soy sauce, or yeah, let's go with soy sauce. And then it almost seems like some oak tannins. Definitely could be that. It could be kind of from the sherry itself. But on the very back, there is a nice, not overly like removing the moisture from your mouth, but a nice drying sensation. And it lasts for a surprising amount of time, given the fact that this is a young whiskey. Speaking of that, there's really no other indication that this is a young whiskey. Talked about young whiskeys on this channel in the past. There's almost always something in there where you can tell that it's young, but the key, from at least my experience, for avoiding that situation is good quality sherry casks, and the peat helps as well. So I can say that the hype for this whiskey is completely well deserved. I think I was even watching, I think Ralphie did a review on the the Kilchoman heavily peated batch 9. And at some point, he had mentioned in there that he felt that the Sanaig was the best whiskey coming out of Islay, basically. I think he meant in the kind of in that accessible, available 10-ish year old range. But he felt that the Sanaig was just the best thing that was coming off of Islay in that category. And I, frankly, can't disagree with him. Almost everything about this is just satisfying. The nose, palate, the finish, the sensations. It's just everything works, and there's no cutting corners. I mean, I don't even know what that means, but it just feels like this is just a very well presented, authentic Islay whiskey with like really good casks. The sherry on this, as what we've talked about over maybe the last few weeks, sometimes like sherry can be a really great addition of nuance and flavor, or it can just completely drown what's happening. And the best time, at least in my opinion, that it's ever used is with some peat. And I know I'm not the only one that thinks that, but the way that those two things manage to balance themselves out and play off of each other and enhance each other can just be absolutely magical at times. And I definitely feel like this is one of those. So from a score perspective, I have no issue giving this an 8. It's probably a pretty high 8. This is excellent, and I'm looking forward to drinking the rest of this bottle, and I kind of kicking myself that this is the first time I've actually bought one of these. But hey, there's a time and place for everything, and maybe this is the way it was supposed to be. Maybe I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much a couple years back, and I would have slept on it even longer. But here we are, almost 9 out of 10. I think it was close, but yeah, 8 out of 10, excellent, absolutely fantastic. Value-wise, as I mentioned earlier, this is a no-brainer as well. Almost all of these 46% non-chill filtered, natural color, high-quality Islay whiskeys, whether they're non-age statement, 10 years old, at 46%, they're all really in that $70 or $80 range, and even kind of creeping up beyond that now. So this is fitting right in there. I did see just online, some places have it as high as 95. If that's what you have to pay to get it, that kind of stinks. But especially given that the price on this in the UK, at least from Kilchoman's website, is like £52. So that would put it about that $70 mark. This does seem to be something that we might be paying a little bit of a premium for, but that does seem to kind of be the case with a lot of these peated whiskeys, particularly when there's some sherry involved. But as long as you're not paying more than that $80, $85 range, I would definitely say go for it. You have to pay more than that given where you are. Definitely try it and make sure and see if you can't find it a little bit cheaper than that. But at 70 to 80 bucks, this is a fantastic value. It fits right in. Can't really expect it to be any less than that given the peat and the sherry and just the natural presentation. This is a buy no matter what, provided you like peated Islas. So this is definitely a whiskey that I think, just in the grand scheme of things, if we're limiting things to official bottlings, things that are widely available, this is definitely in the running for Whiskey of the Year. Right there with that Lafroig Carchus from, about a month ago or so now, when I was able to get a bottle and review that. This is right there in terms of quality. I gave that one a 9. I think there's maybe a little bit more depth to that one. There's a little bit more just complexity, where this is kind of coming at you with something it's coming at you a little bit more straightforward. Although that's not to say that it's simple. It isn't. It's just a little bit kind of louder. It's announcing what it is and it's sticking to it, and that's totally fine. But I think that puts it at the 8. But this is definitely, again, if we're talking official bottlings, I don't know if I've had something this year that's as good as this one. With the obvious exception of like the Bunnahabhain 12, those two may definitely be something that I have to look closely at when it comes for Whiskey of the Year time. Especially being a brand new channel. Last year's I named the Kilchoman 16 my whiskey of the year. It was in one of the podcast episodes. So I haven't named anything whiskey of the year before, really, particularly when it comes to more widely available stuff. And I think if these two are in the running, so what that means is basically I don't have anything saying, well, I named Buna 12 whiskey of the year last year. I'll do something different this year. I've got a fresh slate, so trying to figure out which of those two. And right now, it's probably between those two. We'll see. Probably be cracking a few new bottles open over the next few months as well. So, still time for some surprises, but we'll see. But I don't think there's too much else to say about Kilchoman Sanaig. It's a fantastic bottle of whiskey. There's a lot of great bottles of whiskey out there still to this day, even at the more affordable end of the price spectrum. And I'm happy to have finally gotten around to picking up a bottle of this and trying it. And yeah, let me know what you think of Kilchoman. I have a feeling that most of you are probably gonna be big fans of this, but yeah, let me know how much you love it. If you're one of the ones that doesn't get it and you have an alternative that you love, let me know down below in the comments. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button below the video and click the subscribe for more whiskey reviews and more non-review content, which should be coming in the relatively near future, let's say, as we get the summer months coming to the end here. But once again, thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week with another whiskey review. Cheers.